Professor Zarathek had taught xenobiology at the Galactic University for over 3 centuries. She had dissected creatures from gas giants, studied silicon-based life forms, and cataloged species that could survive in the vacuum of space. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the day a human student raised their hand and asked a question that would shatter everything she thought she knew about life in the universe. "Professor," the human named Sarah had said, her voice carrying that peculiar mix of curiosity and innocence that made her species so endearing yet terrifying. "Why do all the textbooks call Earth a Class XI death world? It seems like a pretty normal place to us." The lecture hall fell silent. 200 alien students from across the galaxy turned to stare at the lone human in their midst. Some had never seen a human before. Earth had only joined the Galactic Federation 5 years ago, and humans were still considered an exotic curiosity. Others had heard rumors, but dismissed them as impossible. Professor Zarathek's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous habit from her homeworld. She looked at Sarah, this small, fragile-looking creature with her soft pink skin and tiny teeth, and realized that she was about to explain to the most dangerous predator in known space why her homeworld was considered uninhabitable by every other species in the galaxy. The truth was about to come out, and the professor wasn't sure any of them were ready for it. Professor Zarathek stood frozen at the front of the lecture hall, her purple-scaled hands gripping the holographic display controls so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and she could feel the weight of 200 alien gazes shifting between herself and the human student who had just asked it. Sarah Chun sat in the 3rd row, her brown eyes wide with genuine curiosity. She wore the standard-issue gray uniform of the Galactic University, though it had been specially tailored for her unusual anatomy. 2 arms instead of 4, impossibly small torso, and those strange legs that bent in only one direction. Her dark hair was tied back in what humans called a ponytail, and she had that relaxed posture that humans somehow maintained even in the presence of beings who could crush them without effort. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. A few students began to whisper among themselves in their various languages, the chittering clicks of the Veltar, the harmonic tones of the Christine Collective, the deep rumbles of the Gorvakian stone speakers. Professor Zarathek could hear fragments of their conversations, and most of them centered around the same theme. Surely the human was joking. But Zarathek knew better. She had studied the human application files when Earth had first applied for Federation membership. She had read the biological assessments, the environmental reports, the psychological evaluations. She knew exactly what kind of world had produced the being sitting so casually in her classroom, and the knowledge terrified her. She began, then stopped. How could she explain this? How could she make them understand without causing a panic? She looked around the classroom, taking in the diverse array of species that had gathered to learn about xenobiology. There were the Kalani twins in the front row, their translucent blue skin shimmering as they shared thoughts through their psychic link. Behind them sat Grokter the Mighty, a 7-foot-tall Gorvakian whose stone-like hide could stop plasma bolts. In the back corner, a Veltar student hung upside down from the ceiling, its 6 limbs perfectly adapted for its arboreal lifestyle. All of them, every single one, came from worlds that would be considered paradise compared to Earth. "Miss Chun," the professor finally said, her voice carefully controlled, "are you familiar with the classification system we use for planetary habitability?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. Class I worlds are perfect for supporting multiple forms of life, with stable climates, abundant resources, and minimal environmental hazards. Class XI worlds are." She paused, her brow furrowing slightly. "Well, according to the textbook, they're described as hellscapes unsuitable for any known form of life. But that doesn't make sense because obviously we live on Earth just fine." A nervous laugh rippled through the classroom. Several students exchanged glances that clearly said typical human ignorance. But Professor Zarathek didn't laugh. She had spent too many sleepless nights reviewing Earth's environmental data to find any humor in the situation. "Miss Chun," she said slowly, "what is the atmospheric composition of your homeworld?" "Oh, that's easy," Sarah replied. "About 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% other gases like argon and carbon dioxide." The classroom went dead silent. Even the whispers stopped. Kalani Prime, one of the blue twins, raised a trembling hand. Professor, she said in her melodic voice, did the human just say that her world's atmosphere contains 21% oxygen? Yes, Sarah confirmed cheerfully. Why do you ask? The Kalani twins' psychic bond with her sister flickered with distress. Because oxygen concentrations above 15% are considered highly dangerous. At 21%, any spark could trigger massive atmospheric fires that would consume entire continents. Sarah blinked. But we use fire all the time. We cook with it. We use it for warmth. We even have controlled explosions in our vehicles' engines. It's not that dangerous. Grokter the Mighty, whose people were known throughout the galaxy for their fearlessness in battle, actually took a step backward. Controlled explosions? He rumbled in his bass voice. In your transportation devices? Well, yes, Sarah said, looking around the room with growing confusion. Internal combustion engines. They're pretty basic technology. We've been using them for over a century. Professor Zarathek felt her heart skip a beat. All four of them. She had prepared for this moment, had run through various scenarios in her mind, but the casual way the human described living with constant controlled explosions was somehow more terrifying than any of her worst nightmares. Miss Chun, she said carefully, what is the average temperature range on your homeworld? Depends where you are, Sarah replied with a shrug. At the poles, it can get down to about minus 89 degrees Celsius in winter. At the equator, it might reach 54 degrees Celsius in summer. Where I grew up in California, it was usually between 10 and 35 degrees Celsius year-round. The temperature readings sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the classroom. Professor Zarathek pulled up a holographic display showing the habitable temperature ranges for various species. The Kalani preferred temperatures between 45 and 50 degrees Celsius, and that was considered quite broad. The Veltar couldn't survive outside of a 5-degree range around 38 degrees. The Christine Collective required precisely 42.7 degrees to maintain their crystalline structures, and the humans lived comfortably across a range that would kill most known species. The temperature variations you described, Professor Zarathek said slowly, represent a range wider than any other known habitable world in the galaxy. Most species can only survive within a few degrees of their optimal temperature. Sarah looked genuinely surprised. Really? But Earth's temperature is super stable compared to most planets. I mean, we have ice ages every few 100,000 years where the temperature drops by about 6 degrees globally, and most of the planet gets covered in glaciers. But between ice ages, things are pretty consistent. Ice ages, squeaked a Veltar from the ceiling. Your world regularly becomes uninhabitable. Not uninhabitable, Sarah corrected. Just different. Life adapts. During the last ice age, my ancestors learned to hunt mammoths and survive in sub-zero temperatures with nothing but animal skins and fire. The word hunt sent a visible shudder through the classroom. The Kalani twins unconsciously moved closer together, their psychic bond radiating distress. The Veltar students' 6 eyes darted nervously around the room, as if searching for escape routes. Even Grokter the Mighty, whose people were among the few carnivorous species in the galaxy, looked uncomfortable. Professor Zarathek realized she needed to establish some context before her students went into full panic mode. She dimmed the lights and activated a holographic star map showing the local galactic region. Class, she said, her voice taking on the formal tone she used for her most serious lectures, let me explain how we categorize worlds in our galaxy. Of the approximately 847 million planets we have cataloged that are capable of supporting life, 94% are classified as Class I through Class 3 worlds. These are planets with stable climates, mild temperature variations, and atmospheric compositions that can support multiple forms of life. She highlighted various star systems in green as she spoke. Class 4 through Class 8 worlds represent increasingly hostile environments. Perhaps they have slightly higher radiation levels or temperature variations that exceed 10 degrees, or atmospheric pressure variations that make travel between elevations difficult. The green dots gave way to yellow, then orange as she moved up the classification scale. Class 9 through Class 11 worlds are considered extremely hostile. They might have temperature swings of 20 degrees, or contain trace amounts of toxic gases, or have weather patterns that include occasional severe storms. Finally, she highlighted a single red dot in an otherwise empty section of the map. And then we have Class XI worlds. Planets so hostile so utterly alien to normal life that we assumed they could never support complex organisms. Until 5 years ago, we had identified exactly 17 such worlds in the galaxy. Sarah followed the professor's gaze to the red dot. "Let me guess," she said with a rueful smile. "Earth is number 18. Miss Chun, Professor Zarathek said quietly, "Earth isn't just number 18. According to our classification system, Earth is the most hostile planet known to support life in the galaxy." The human student sat back in her chair, clearly struggling to process this information. "But it's not that bad. I mean, sure, we have some challenges, but every species has to deal with environmental pressures, right?" Veltar, student Churek, dropped from the ceiling to a nearby perch, his voice high with disbelief. "Challenges? You call regular ice ages and controlled explosions challenges? Well, what kind of challenges does your species face?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "The most dangerous weather on my homeworld," Churek replied, "is when the morning mist is slightly thicker than usual. It can reduce visibility to as little as 2 kilometers. Sarah stared at him. That's your dangerous weather?" "Seek Folk." "Miss Chun," Professor Zarathek interjected before the situation could escalate further. "Perhaps you could describe some of your homeworld's weather patterns for the class?" "Sure," Sarah said, still looking puzzled. "We have thunderstorms that can produce winds over 150 kilometers per hour and lightning bolts with temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. Tornadoes that can level entire cities. Hurricanes that can be hundreds of kilometers wide with winds over 250 kilometers per hour. Blizzards that can dump several meters of snow in a few hours while producing winds that will freeze exposed skin in minutes." The classroom was so quiet that the hum of the life support system seemed deafening. Professor Zarathek watched as her students processed what they had just heard. She could see the exact moment when the reality of the situation hit them. Their faces went through a progression of expressions: disbelief, confusion, dawning comprehension, and, finally, terror. "You're joking," whispered Kalani Secondary, her usual melodic voice cracked with strain. "Please tell me you're joking." "I'm not joking," Sarah said softly. "I've been in all of those types of weather. Most humans have. We just deal with it. We build stronger houses. We track the storms. We prepare. During really bad weather, we might lose power for a few days, but we usually have backup supplies." "Lose power?" Dr. the Mighty's voice was barely a whisper. "What happens to your climate control systems?" Sarah looked confused again. "We don't really have planet-wide climate control. We just dress appropriately for the weather and adjust our activities. If it's too hot, we find shade or go indoors where it's cooler. If it's too cold, we wear more clothes or build a fire." "Build a fire," repeated Professor Zarathek numbly. "In an atmosphere that's 21% oxygen." "Right," Sarah confirmed. "Although you have to be careful in dry conditions. Sometimes wildfires can burn for months and consume millions of acres of forest." And that was when Kalani Prime fainted. The medical team arrived within minutes of Kalani Prime's collapse, their anti-grav stretcher humming softly as they loaded the unconscious student onto it. The other Kalani twin, Secondary, hovered nearby, her psychic distress rippling through the classroom in waves that made several empathic species visibly uncomfortable. "She'll be fine," Dr. Kextar assured the class, his 4 medical arms working efficiently to attach monitoring devices. "Just psychic shock from processing too much disturbing information." Her sister's emotional feedback loop overwhelmed her neural pathways. Sarah watched the proceedings with obvious concern. "Is she going to be okay? I didn't mean to upset anyone. I was just answering the professor's questions." Dr. Kextar's compound eyes focused on the human with professional interest. "Fascinating," he murmured. "No sympathetic stress response, no elevated heart rate, no panic pheromones. Subject appears genuinely concerned, but physiologically unaffected by witnessing another being's medical emergency." "Should I be panicking?" Sarah asked, looking around the room at her clearly distressed classmates. "I mean, fainting is usually not life-threatening. People faint all the time where I come from." "People faint all the time." Dr. Kextar's medical training kicked in, and he pulled out his scanner. "Miss Chin, would you mind if I took some basic biological readings? I'm curious about human physiology." Sarah shrugged. "Sure, no problem." The doctor ran his scanner over the human student, and Professor Zarathek could see the readings on his display. What she saw made her blood run cold. "Doctor," she said quietly, "are those readings correct?" Dr. Kextar checked his scanner recalibrated it, and ran it again. I'm afraid so, Professor. Miss Chun, are you aware that your circulatory system operates at pressures that would cause catastrophic hemorrhaging in most species? What do you mean? Sarah asked. Your blood pressure, the doctor explained patiently, is approximately 120/80 in your measurement system. To put that in perspective, my people maintain a blood pressure of 15/10. The Veltar average about 8/5. A reading like yours would indicate imminent cardiovascular failure in any known species. Sarah looked genuinely confused. But that's completely normal for humans. 120/80 is actually considered ideal. We start worrying when it gets above 140/90. Dr. Kekstar's medical scanner fell from his nerveless fingers and clattered on the floor. Professor Zarathek stepped forward, realizing that this impromptu medical examination might actually help her students understand what they were dealing with. Doctor, what else can you tell us about Miss Chen's physiology? The medical professional picked up his scanner with trembling hands. Her body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius, which would cause protein denaturation in most species. Her heart rate is 72 beats per minute, which seems impossibly fast for an organism of her size. And her brain, he paused, looking at the readings again. Her brain is consuming nearly 20% of her total energy output just to function. That's more than the total energy budget of most small organisms. What does that mean? Asked Churek from his perch near the ceiling. It means, Dr. Kekstar said slowly, that the human brain is essentially running a constant metabolic fever just to maintain consciousness. The amount of energy required to keep that much neural activity functioning should be unsustainable. Sarah raised her hand. Excuse me, but don't you guys sleep? We need about 8 hours of sleep every day just to let our brains recover from normal activity. The question caught everyone off guard. Sleep was not a concept most species were familiar with. Sleep? Professor Zarathek asked. You know, unconsciousness. Rest. We basically shut down for about a third of every day. Our brains use the time to sort through memories, repair cellular damage, and flush out metabolic waste. The room fell silent again. Finally, Proctor the Mighty found his voice. You become unconscious for 8 hours every day, voluntarily? It's not really voluntary, Sarah explained. If we don't sleep, we start hallucinating, our immune systems fail, our reaction times slow down, and eventually we'll collapse from exhaustion. Going without sleep for too long can actually kill us. But, stuttered Churek, what if predators attack while you're unconscious? Sarah paused, considering the question. Well, our ancestors used to take turns sleeping, so someone was always on watch. And we usually sleep in sheltered locations. But, honestly, humans are pretty much apex predators on our world, so we don't have too many natural enemies. Apex predators? Dr. Kekstar had pulled out a more sophisticated scanner and was taking detailed readings. Miss Chun, what exactly do humans eat? Oh, we're omnivores, Sarah replied cheerfully. We eat both plants and animals. Meat, vegetables, fruits, grains, dairy products. Pretty much anything organic that won't kill us. Anything that won't kill you. Professor Zarathek felt compelled to ask for clarification. That implies there are organic substances that would kill you. Well, yeah, lots of plants and animals on Earth are poisonous or toxic. But humans have pretty good detoxification systems. Our livers can process most biological toxins, and we have strong stomach acid that kills most harmful bacteria. Dr. Kekstar's scanner was beeping frantically. Professor, he said in a voice tight with disbelief, her stomach is producing hydrochloric acid at a concentration that would dissolve the internal organs of most species. It's just stomach acid, Sarah protested. Everyone has it. Well, everyone human, anyway. We need it to break down food, especially meat proteins. Miss Chun, Professor Zarathek said carefully, most species in the galaxy process food through enzymatic breakdown or bacterial digestion. The idea of using industrial strength acid for food processing is unprecedented. Industrial strength. Sarah looked worried. Is that bad? I mean, sometimes people get ulcers when the acid levels get too high, but it's usually treatable. Ulcers? Dr. Kekstar was frantically taking notes. You mean your own digestive acid sometimes eats holes in your stomach lining? Sometimes, Sarah admitted. Usually it's caused by bacterial infections or stress. But stomach lining regenerates pretty quickly. I think it completely replaces itself every few days. The medical scanner fell silent. Dr. Kextar stared at his readings, then at Sarah, then back at his readings. Miss Chun, he said finally, according to my scans, your cellular regeneration rate is approximately 50 times faster than galactic average. Your immune system appears to be in a constant state of high alert. And your skeletal structure. He paused, checking the readings again. Your bones are incredibly dense. They're like compressed ceramic composite. Dense bones are important, Sarah explained. They need to support our body weight under Earth's gravity. Plus, they help protect our organs when we fall or get hit. When you fall or get hit? Shurek's voice had risen to an alarmed squeak. How often does this happen? Sarah thought about it. Well, kids fall down a lot when they're learning to walk and run. Most adults fall or bump into things at least a few times a year. Athletes might get hit or tackled regularly, depending on their sport. Grokter the Mighty leaned forward with interest. Your people engage in combat for entertainment? Not combat exactly, Sarah said. Though I guess some sports are pretty aggressive. Football, hockey, rugby, boxing, martial arts. But there are gentler sports too, like tennis or swimming or running. Running. Professor Zarathek had to ask. You run for sport? Sure. Marathons are really popular. That's when you run for about 42 kilometers without stopping. 42 kilometers? Dr. Kextar's scanner was beeping again. Miss Chun, how fast can humans run? Depends on the distance. For short sprints, our best athletes can hit about 45 kilometers per hour. For longer distances, a good marathon runner might maintain about 20 kilometers per hour for the whole race. Professor Zarathek pulled up her holographic display again, this time showing locomotion data for various species. Class, she said weakly. The average top speed for most galactic species is between 8 and 12 kilometers per hour, sustainable for distances of 1 to 3 kilometers maximum. But humans are built for long-distance running, Sarah continued, oblivious to the growing horror around her. We're actually pursuit predators. Our ancestors would chase prey animals for hours or even days until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. We're not the fastest, but we have incredible endurance. Pursuit predators, repeated Shurek in a whisper. You hunted by running other animals to death? Sometimes, Sarah confirmed. Though we also use tools. Spears, bows, and arrows, traps. Humans are really good at making tools. And throwing things. We have excellent hand-eye coordination. Dr. Kextar was scanning Sarah's arms and shoulders now. Miss Chun, could you demonstrate your throwing ability? Sarah looked around the classroom. I don't really have anything to throw. And I wouldn't want to break anything. Break anything? Professor Zarathek's voice was barely audible. Well, humans can throw objects pretty hard. Professional baseball players can throw a ball over 160 kilometers per hour with enough accuracy to hit a target the size of a dinner plate from 18 meters away. The medical scanner was making distressed noises as Dr. Kextar examined Sarah's shoulder joint. Professor, he said in amazement, her arm structure is like a biological catapult. The leverage ratios, the muscle attachments, the range of motion, it's perfectly designed for high-velocity projectile launches. Is that unusual? Sarah asked. Miss Chun, Professor Zarathek said, pulling up another holographic display. The average throw velocity for most galactic species is between 15 and 25 kilometers per hour, accurate to perhaps 2 meters at a distance of 5 meters. Sarah stared at the display. That's really slow. And not very accurate. Because most species didn't evolve as weapons-based hunters, Dr. Kextar explained. We evolved as grazers, filter feeders, scavengers, or passive predators. The idea of actively pursuing and killing prey is almost unheard of. But what did you eat before you developed agriculture? Sarah asked. Plants, said Shurek. Just plants. The Veltar have always been herbivorous. Filtered microorganisms from our oceans, added Kalani's secondary, who had been quietly supporting her still unconscious sister. We absorbed minerals directly from rock formations, rumbled Grokter. The Gorvakian people are lithophagous. Sarah looked around the room in amazement. So, none of you were ever predators? You never hunted other animals for food? The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Professor Zarathek spoke. Miss Chun, you have to understand, the concept of one species deliberately killing and consuming another species is almost incomprehensible to most galactic civilizations. It's one of the reasons Earth was classified as a Class XI world. We assumed that any planet that produced predatory behavior could never develop intelligent life. Because predators would be too violent to form civilizations? Sarah asked. Exactly, Professor Zarathek confirmed. We believe that intelligence and violence were mutually exclusive. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she spoke. But humans aren't particularly violent. I mean, sure, we have wars sometimes, and there's crime, but most humans are peaceful most of the time. We cooperate. We help each other. We build communities. Being a predator doesn't make us evil. Miss Chun, Dr. Kextar said gently, you just described your species as pursuit predators who hunt other animals to death, who regularly engage in activities that cause physical injury, who evolve to throw projectiles with lethal accuracy, and who live on a planet where the weather includes phenomena that would destroy most civilizations. From our perspective, humans are terrifyingly dangerous. Sarah looked around the classroom at her fellow students, the ones who were still conscious anyway. She could see the fear in their alien features, the way they unconsciously leaned away from her, the protective gestures they made without thinking. I never thought about it that way, she said quietly. We just think of ourselves as normal, and that Professor Zarathek realized might be the most frightening thing of all. The next day, Professor Zarathek arrived at her classroom to find it nearly empty. Only 12 students had shown up out of the usual 200, and most of them sat as far from Sarah's usual seat as possible. The human student herself was absent, which somehow made the remaining students even more nervous. Where is everyone? Asked Grokter the Mighty, though even his imposing 7-foot frame seemed diminished as he glanced around the sparse classroom. 17 species filed formal requests to transfer out of the class. Professor Zarathek replied, checking her holographic roster. 43 students are in the medical wing being treated for anxiety-related disorders. 61 have requested psychological counseling. And the remaining students are apparently indisposed according to their dormitory supervisors. Churek, hanging from his usual ceiling perch, chittered nervously. Professor, is it true what the humans said yesterday? About their planet. Every word, Professor Zarathek confirmed. I spent most of last night reviewing the Earth assessment files that were compiled when humanity applied for Federation membership. If anything, Miss Chun understated the dangers. Kalani Secondary, who had remained to monitor her sister's recovery, shimmered with distress. The medical staff says that Kalani Prime experienced a complete psychic shock. Her mind couldn't process the concept of living with constant environmental threats. Speaking of which, Professor Zarathek said, I've received permission from the university administration to continue our examination of human biology and Earth conditions, but only for students who voluntarily choose to remain. Anyone who wants to leave can do so without academic penalty. None of the remaining students moved. Very well, the professor continued. I've also arranged for a guest lecturer today, someone who can provide us with a more comprehensive understanding of human civilization. The classroom doors opened, and Sarah entered, followed by a tall male human wearing the formal robes of a visiting scholar. The alien students immediately tensed, and Churek actually scrambled higher on the ceiling. Class, Professor Zarathek announced. This is Dr. Marcus Webb, a human anthropologist and historian. He's here to help us understand how human society developed on such a hostile world. Dr. Webb smiled, an expression that showed his teeth, which the professor noted caused several students to flinch reflexively. Thank you, Professor. I understand there was some confusion yesterday about Earth's environmental classification. Confusion might be putting it mildly, muttered Kalani Secondary. I see, Dr. Webb said, his expression becoming more serious. Well, perhaps it would help if I explained how human civilization actually developed. Sarah told me about your discussion yesterday, and I think some historical context might be useful. He activated a holographic display showing a timeline. Human civilization is approximately 12,000 years old. Before that, our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers for roughly 300,000 years. 300,000 years, Grokter repeated slowly. Your species survived as primitive predators for 300 millennia? That's right, Dr. Webb confirmed. During that time, humans spread across every continent on Earth except Antarctica. We adapted to live in tropical jungles, Arctic tundra, high-altitude mountains, and desert wastelands. Wherever we went, we became the dominant predator. He changed the display to show a world map with migration patterns. This expansion wasn't peaceful exploration. Humans competed with other predators for territory and resources. We hunted species to extinction, fought wars with other human tribes, and survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and global climate shifts. Churek's voice was barely a whisper. You drove species to extinction? Deliberately? Sometimes deliberately, sometimes as a side effect of our expansion, Dr. Webb replied matter-of-factly. Humans are incredibly efficient hunters. On every continent we settled, the large prey animals disappeared within a few thousand years. Professor Zarathek felt compelled to clarify. Dr. Webb, when you say large prey animals, what exactly do you mean? Mammoths, giant ground sloths, cave bears, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves. Most of these animals were larger and more powerful than humans, but we hunted them anyway. How? Asked Proctor, his stone-like features showing obvious distress. Teamwork, strategy, and tools, Dr. Webb explained. Humans are pack hunters. We developed complex communication, coordinated group tactics, and increasingly sophisticated weapons. A single human might not be able to kill a mammoth, but a group of humans with spears and fire could take down almost anything. He changed the display to show various human weapons throughout history. This is a timeline of human weapon development. Sharpened sticks, stone axes, bows and arrows, swords, gunpowder weapons, and eventually modern firearms. The images of weapons sent visible shudders through the remaining students. Professor Zarathek noted that even she was feeling uncomfortable looking at devices designed purely to cause damage. Dr. Webb, she said carefully, these weapons seem remarkably advanced for a primitive species. Humans have always been toolmakers, he replied. It's one of our defining characteristics. We don't just use tools, we constantly improve them. Every generation of human weapons was deadlier than the last. Sarah raised her hand. Dr. Webb, should you maybe mention that we didn't just make weapons? Humans also invented agriculture, medicine, art, music, literature, science. Of course, Dr. Webb agreed. But it's important to understand that human technological development was always driven by competition and conflict. We invented agriculture because we needed to feed larger populations for warfare. We developed medicine to keep our warriors alive. We created better transportation to move armies more efficiently. Armies? Kalani Secondary's psychic distress was making the air in the classroom feel heavy. Groups of organized fighters, Dr. Webb explained. Human warfare evolved from small tribal conflicts to massive battles involving hundreds of thousands of combatants. He displayed a new set of images showing historical battles. The Battle of Gettysburg involved over 150,000 human soldiers. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted for 5 months and resulted in over 2 million casualties. World War II saw the entire human species divided into 2 massive alliances, fighting across every continent and ocean on the planet. Casualties? Proctor's voice was barely audible. Deaths and injuries, Dr. Webb clarified. World War II alone killed approximately 85 million humans. The number hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Professor Zarathek quickly calculated the populations of the various species in the classroom. 85 million casualties would represent the complete extinction of several galactic civilizations. But Churek managed to say, but that's monstrous. How could you kill so many of your own species? Humans have always been tribal, Dr. Webb explained patiently. We form strong bonds with our immediate group, but we can be remarkably ruthless toward outsiders. Throughout our history, we've fought wars over territory, resources, ideology, religion, and sometimes just because we didn't trust our neighbors. Religion. Professor Zarathek had to ask. Belief systems, Sarah interjected. Humans developed various ways of understanding the universe and our place in it. Unfortunately, people with different beliefs sometimes fought about whose version was correct. You fought wars over abstract concepts. Kalani Secondary's psychic emanations were approaching panic levels. Frequently, Dr. Webb confirmed. The Crusades, the 30 Years' War, the conflicts between different Islamic sects, the wars between Christians and Muslims, the persecution of various minorities. Religion was actually one of the most common causes of human conflict. He changed the display again, this time showing a chart of human conflicts throughout history. On average, humans have been engaged in organized warfare approximately 94% of the time since we developed agriculture. There have been very few periods in human history when some group of humans wasn't fighting some other group of humans. The silence in the classroom was profound. Finally, Proctor spoke up. Dr. Webb, you're describing a species that seems utterly consumed by violence. How did you ever develop space travel? How did you create art and science and philosophy if you were constantly fighting? Dr. Webb smiled again, that terrifying display of teeth that made the students flinch. Because humans don't just fight, Proctor. We compete. Everything we do is competitive. We compete to build better cities, create better art, develop better technology, discover better scientific theories. War was just one form of competition. But, Sarah added, competition also drove us to incredible achievements. The space program that eventually brought humans to the stars started as a competition between two human nations to see who could build better rockets. You militarized space exploration? Churek asked in horror. Initially, yes, Dr. Webb admitted. The first rockets were weapons. But humans have this remarkable ability to take military technology and adapt it for peaceful purposes. The same rockets that were designed to carry warheads eventually carried humans to the moon. You went to your moon? Professor Zarathek asked. While you were still fighting wars on your planet? We went to the moon because we were fighting wars on our planet, Dr. Webb corrected. The Apollo program was part of a larger competition called the Cold War. Two human superpowers spent decades trying to prove their technological superiority without actually fighting a direct war. A war fought through technological advancement, Professor Zarathek said slowly. That's actually quite clever. Humans excel at finding new ways to compete, Sarah agreed. When direct violence became too dangerous, we found other ways to prove dominance. Economic competition, technological races, cultural influence, sports. Sports? Proctor leaned forward. You mentioned this yesterday. Ritualise de combat Dr. Webb explained. Humans channel their competitive instincts into games where people try to defeat each other according to specific rules. It satisfies our need to compete without actually killing anyone. He showed images of various human sports. Football, where two teams try to control territory and advance toward their opponent's goal. Boxing, where two humans try to knock each other unconscious. Chess, where two players try to simulate military conquest through strategic thinking. You simulate war for entertainment, Churek said weakly. We simulate everything for entertainment, Sarah pointed out. Humans play games that simulate hunting, fighting, building civilizations, exploring space, managing economies, even farming. We love competition so much that we'll compete over almost anything. Dr. Webb nodded. This competitive drive is what allowed humans to survive on Earth. But it's also what allowed us to excel once we established civilizations. Every human achievement, from architecture to medicine to space travel, came from humans trying to do something better than it had been done before. Professor Zarathek studied the timeline Dr. Webb had displayed. Dr. Webb, this is a remarkable history, but I have to ask, are humans still this violent? Are they still constantly fighting wars? That's an excellent question, Dr. Webb replied. The answer is complicated. Humans have definitely become less violent over time. We've developed international laws, global organizations, and diplomatic methods for resolving conflicts. The number of wars and the proportion of humans who die in violent conflicts has decreased dramatically over the past century. But, Sarah added, humans haven't become peaceful. We've just gotten better at channeling our competitive instincts in nonviolent directions. We compete economically, scientifically, culturally. The same drive that once led us to conquer each other's territories now leads us to try to build better businesses, discover new scientific principles, create better art and entertainment. And Dr. Webb concluded, when humans finally developed space travel and made contact with galactic civilization, we discovered that we were the only known species with this level of competitive drive. Most galactic species evolved as cooperative, peaceful beings. Humans are apparently unique in having evolved from predators who turned their predatory instincts toward technological and cultural advancement. Professor Zarathek looked around at her remaining students. They all looked stunned, overwhelmed by the information they had just received. Class, she said gently, I think we need some time to process this information. Dr. Webb, thank you for that illuminating presentation. My pleasure, Professor. If you have any other questions about human history or behavior, please feel free to contact me. As the humans left the classroom, Professor Zarathek heard Churek whisper to Grokter, no wonder their planet is classified as a death world. It's not just the environment that's dangerous. It's everything that lives there. And, despite herself, Professor Zarathek found herself nodding in agreement. By the third day, only 8 students remained in Professor Zarathek's xenobiology class. The rest had either transferred out, requested medical leave, or simply stopped showing up. The professor couldn't blame them. She herself had spent the previous 2 nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling of her quarters and trying to process the reality of what humans actually were. Sarah entered the classroom with her usual cheerful demeanor, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her mere presence had reduced the class size by over 95%. She took her usual seat in the 3rd row, pulled out her note-taking device, and smiled at her remaining classmates. The smile made Churek scramble even higher up the wall. "Good morning, class," Professor Zarathek began, her voice carefully controlled. "Today we have another guest speaker. Dr. Yexandri is a psychological specialist from the Galactic Mental Health Institute. She's here to help us understand the psychological implications of what we've learned about humans." Dr. Yexandri entered the classroom, her tall, thin frame moving with the careful precision of her species. As a member of the Mentari Collective, she possessed natural telepathic abilities and had spent centuries studying the psychology of various galactic species. "Thank you, Professor," Dr. Yexandri said, her voice carrying the subtle harmonic overtones that indicated she was simultaneously communicating telepathically with her colleagues. "I've been reviewing the reports from your previous classes, and I must admit, the psychological profile of humanity is unprecedented." She activated a holographic display showing brain scan comparisons. "Let me begin with basic neurological structures. This is a typical galactic brain pattern: organized, efficient, optimized for cooperative behavior and peaceful problem-solving." The display showed a brain scan with gentle, flowing patterns of neural activity. "And this," she continued, switching to a new image, "is a human brain scan." The difference was startling. Where the typical galactic brain showed smooth, regular patterns, the human brain displayed intense, chaotic bursts of activity. Neural pathways fired in complex, overlapping patterns that seemed almost aggressive in their intensity. "Miss Chun," Dr. Yexandri said, turning to Sarah, "would you mind if I conducted a real-time scan while we talk?" "Sure," Sarah replied. "What do you want to talk about?" "Let's start simple. What did you have for breakfast this morning?" As Sarah began to describe her morning meal, the holographic display lit up with her brain activity. The alien students watched in fascination and horror as neural pathways blazed across the projection like an electrical storm. "Remarkable," Dr. Yexandri murmured. "Even during casual conversation, the human brain is operating at activity levels that would indicate extreme stress or panic in any other species." "Is that bad?" Sarah asked, noting the concerned expressions around the room. "Not bad," Dr. Yexandri clarified. "Just intense. Your brain is processing information at approximately 20 times the rate of the galactic average. You're simultaneously analyzing vocal patterns, facial expressions, body language, potential threats, social hierarchies, and dozens of other data streams that most species handle sequentially." She changed the display to show comparative reaction times. "Watch what happens when I create a sudden stimulus." Dr. Yexandri clapped her hands together sharply. The sound echoed through the classroom, and the brain scan immediately exploded with activity. Sarah had spun toward the sound, her hand moving toward her belt, her eyes scanning for threats, all in the span of milliseconds. "Fascinating," the psychologist noted. "Your threat assessment and response time is 0.3 seconds. The galactic average is 2.7 seconds. Is that why humans survived such a dangerous planet?" asked Proctor, his voice thoughtful despite his obvious nervousness. "Partially," Dr. Yexandri confirmed. "But the real key to human psychology is this." She highlighted a specific region of the brain scan. "This is the Human Fear Response Center. Notice how it's constantly active." "Constantly?" Professor Zarathek leaned forward to examine the data. "Humans exist in a permanent state of mild stress," Dr. Yexandri explained. "Their brains are always preparing for potential threats, always ready to fight or flee. This is what allowed them to survive on Earth. But it also explains some of their more unusual behaviors." Sarah raised her hand. "What kind of unusual behaviors?" Dr. Yexandri consulted her notes. "Risk-taking, competitive behavior, aggression, but also creativity, innovation, and problem-solving." The same neural pathways that keep humans alert for danger also drive them to seek out new experiences and challenges. She displayed a new set of brain scans. These are human brain patterns during various activities. Note how similar they are. The scans showed intense neural activity regardless of whether the human was fighting, playing sports, creating art, solving scientific problems, or even watching entertainment. You engage the same mental mechanisms for creative work that you use for Mortal Kombat, Dr. Yexandri observed. This is why humans excel at both warfare and scientific advancement. What about emotions? Kalani Secondary asked, her psychic abilities making her particularly interested in the topic. How do humans process emotional information? I'm glad you asked, Dr. Yexandri replied. Miss Chun, could you think about something that makes you happy? Sarah smiled and thought for a moment. The brain scan immediately shifted to show new patterns of activity. Now think about something sad. Sarah's expression changed, and the neural patterns shifted again. Now think about something that makes you angry. The brain scan exploded with activity. Neural pathways fired in rapid, aggressive patterns that made several students take an involuntary step backward. The intensity of human emotional responses, Dr. Yexandri noted, is approximately 10 times stronger than galactic normal. When humans feel joy, they feel intense euphoria. When they feel sadness, they experience crushing despair. When they feel anger, she gestured at the violent neural storm on the display. They experience rage that would be clinically diagnosed as psychotic breakdown in any other species. But I'm not psychotic, Sarah protested. I was just thinking about the time someone cut me off in traffic last week. It was mildly annoying. Mildly annoying, Dr. Yexandri repeated, looking at the brain scan that resembled a neural hurricane. Miss Chun, the level of emotional activation you just displayed would require immediate medical intervention for most galactic species. Really? Sarah looked genuinely surprised. How do other species experience anger? Shurek spoke up from the wall. For my people, anger is a slow, warming sensation that builds over several days. When we reach what we consider intense anger, we might raise our voices slightly or move away from the source of irritation. That sounds very peaceful, Sarah said admiringly. What concerns me, Dr. Yexandri continued, is that humans seem to enjoy intense emotional experiences. Miss Chun, do humans deliberately seek out situations that cause fear, anger, or sadness? Well, sure, Sarah replied. Horror movies, tragic novels, competitive sports, extreme sports, roller coasters. We pay money to be scared, to feel sad, to experience intense emotions. It's entertainment. The psychologist stared at her for a long moment. You pay money to experience fear? All the time. Horror movies are a huge industry. People love being terrified as long as they know they're actually safe. Dr. Yexandri turned to address the class. This is perhaps the most alien aspect of human psychology. Most galactic species avoid intense emotions, particularly negative ones. The idea of seeking out fear, anger, or sadness for entertainment is completely incomprehensible to normal psychology. But humans also seek out positive emotions, Sarah pointed out. Comedy, romance, adventure stories, music that makes us happy. We don't just like negative emotions. True, the psychologist agreed, but the intensity is the same. Human joy is as overwhelming as human fear. Your emotional range operates at levels that would be physiologically impossible for most species. She brought up a new display showing psychological profiles. This creates some interesting paradoxes in human behavior. Humans are simultaneously the most violent and most compassionate species we've encountered. You're capable of terrible cruelty and incredible kindness, often toward the same individuals. What do you mean? Asked Proctor. Human relationships, Dr. Yexandri explained, are based on intense emotional bonds that can shift rapidly between love and anger. Humans will fight viciously with family members, then risk their lives to protect those same family members. You form passionate friendships, bitter rivalries, and complex romantic partnerships that involve jealousy, devotion, anger, and sacrifice all at the same time. That sounds exhausting, Kalani Secondary observed. It is, Sarah confirmed. Human relationships require constant work and communication. We have to actively manage our emotions and work to understand each other because our feelings are so intense and changeable. Yet humans also form the strongest social bonds we've ever observed, Dr. Yexandri noted. You'll die for strangers, sacrifice your own well-being for abstract concepts like justice or freedom, and maintain loyalties across impossible distances and time periods. She displayed data on human social behaviors. Humans regularly engage in altruistic behavior that defies logical self-interest. They'll run into burning buildings to save strangers, donate organs to people they've never met, and spend their entire lives working to help others with no personal benefit. But you also go to war, Chirek pointed out. True, Sarah acknowledged. Humans are capable of both incredible kindness and terrible violence, sometimes toward the same people. It's complicated. Dr. Yexandri nodded. This is what makes human psychology so unprecedented. The same intensity that drives humans to violence also drives them to heroism. The same competitive instincts that led to warfare also led to scientific advancement. The same emotional volatility that can destroy relationships also creates passionate love and unbreakable loyalty. How do humans function in society with such intense psychological patterns? Professor Zarathek asked. Through elaborate social structures and cultural rules, Dr. Yexandri replied. Humans have developed complex systems of laws, etiquette, customs, and social expectations that help them manage their intense emotions and competitive instincts. They've essentially created civilization as a way to channel their natural predatory and emotional tendencies in constructive directions. Is that why human art and culture are so complex? Kalani Secondary asked. I've been reading human literature, and it's incredibly intricate compared to galactic works. Exactly, Dr. Yexandri confirmed. Human creativity is driven by the same neural intensity that drives everything else they do. Their art, literature, music, and entertainment are all expressions of their extremely complex emotional and psychological landscape. She showed examples of human cultural works. Human stories often involve conflict, intense emotions, moral ambiguity, and complex character development because that's how humans experience life. A typical human novel contains more psychological depth and emotional range than most species experience in their entire lifetimes. What about human children? Proctor asked suddenly. How do you raise young with such intense psychology? Sarah laughed. Very carefully. Human children are basically tiny, irrational beings with all the emotional intensity of adults, but none of the self-control. Raising them requires constant supervision, education, and patience. Human parenting, Dr. Yexandri noted, is one of the most intensive child-rearing processes in the galaxy. Human parents spend approximately 18 years actively training their offspring to function in society. This includes not just practical skills, but emotional regulation, social behavior, moral reasoning, and impulse control. 18 years. Churek's voice was faint. Most species achieve full maturity in 2 to 3 years. Human children remain partially developed for nearly 2 decades, Dr. Yexandri confirmed. Their brains don't fully mature until their mid-20s, and their emotional regulation systems take even longer to stabilize. That explains a lot, Sarah said ruefully. Teenagers are basically humans with adult-level emotions and child-level judgment. It's a dangerous combination. Dr. Yexandri concluded her presentation by displaying a comprehensive psychological profile of humanity. In summary, humans are a species of emotional and psychological extremes. They experience life with an intensity that would overwhelm most galactic species, but this same intensity drives them to remarkable achievements in creativity, science, and social cooperation. She paused, looking around the nearly empty classroom. The question that remains is whether the rest of the galaxy is ready to coexist with a species this psychologically intense. As if summoned by her words, an emergency alert suddenly blared through the university's communication system. Professor Zarathek quickly accessed the alert on her holographic display. What is it? Sarah asked, noting the professor's expression of shock. Pirates, Professor Zarathek said weakly. The Nexus Raider clan is attacking a civilian transport convoy in the Centauri system. The ships are carrying refugees from the Corval disaster. That's terrible, Sarah said immediately. Is the Federation Navy responding? According to this, the professor replied, checking the data stream, the nearest military vessels are 6 hours away. The pirates will have destroyed the convoy and escaped long before help arrives. The classroom fell silent. In the galaxy's generally peaceful civilization, piracy was rare but devastating when it occurred. Most species had never developed effective combat techniques, and their ships were designed for exploration and trade, not warfare. Then, Sarah stood up. "Professor," she said, her voice carrying a new tone that made Churek immediately scramble toward the ceiling. "Where exactly is the Centauri system from here?" Professor Zarathek checked the stellar navigation data. "Approximately 4 hours by fast courier ship." "But why would you—" She stopped, suddenly, understanding the look in Sarah's eyes. "Oh no," Kalani Secondary whispered, her psychic abilities picking up the change in the human's emotional state. "Oh no. Sarah was no longer the cheerful, curious student they had been studying. Her posture had changed, her eyes had focused with predatory intensity, and her brain scan was showing patterns that made Dr. Yexandri's equipment issue warning alerts. "Professor," Sarah said calmly, "I need to make a communication to the human embassy. We have a ship in this system, and I think it's time my people showed the galaxy what we do to predators who hunt civilians." And that was when the remaining students finally understood why Earth was classified as a death world. The human embassy responded to Sarah's communication within minutes. Professor Zarathek watched in fascination and growing horror as the previously cheerful student transformed into something entirely different. Sarah's casual demeanor had vanished, replaced by a cold, focused intensity that made the remaining alien students unconsciously cluster together at the far end of the classroom. "Ambassador Chun?" Sarah spoke into the holographic communicator, and Professor Zarathek realized with a start that the human diplomat bore a strong physical resemblance to their student. "Sarah, what's your situation?" The ambassador's voice carried the same sudden shift in tone, from diplomatic courtesy to sharp alertness. "Uncle David, we have a civilian convoy under attack by Nexus raiders in the Centauri system. Refugees from the Corval disaster, including families with children. Federation Navy is 6 hours out." The ambassador was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge that made Churek actually whimper. "How many ships in the convoy?" 12 civilian transport, minimal defensive capability. Nexus raiders are fielding at least 20 attack vessels. "Understood. Stand by." The communication switched to what was obviously internal human channels. Professor Zarathek's translation software struggled with the rapid, clipped exchange of information. "Captain Morrison, this is Ambassador Chun. Priority Alpha authorization." "Yes, sir." A new voice, crisp and professional. "We have civilian ships under attack in Centauri. 20 hostile vessels, 12 transports full of refugees." "Understood, sir." Rules of engagement. Full combat authorization. No survivors among the pirates. Professor Zarathek felt her blood run cold. "No survivors" wasn't a phrase she had ever heard in Federation communications. "Sir, the Prometheus is a science vessel. We have minimal weapons." "Captain, those are human civilians being murdered by pirates. Find a way." "Yes, sir." Prometheus moving to intercept. ETA in 90 minutes. The communication ended, and Sarah turned back to the class. Her expression was calm, but Dr. Yexandri's psychological scanners were showing brain patterns that looked like a barely contained storm. "Miss Chun," Professor Zarathek said carefully, "what exactly is going to happen?" "My people are going to stop the pirates," Sarah replied simply. "How?" "You said your ship has minimal weapons." Sarah's smile was nothing like the cheerful expressions she had shown before. This smile was sharp, predatory, and utterly terrifying. "Professor, you're thinking like a civilized species. Humans don't need weapons to be dangerous." Over the next hour, the class monitored the emergency communications from the Centauri system. The pirate attack was proceeding exactly as expected. The raiders were systematically destroying the convoy's defensive escorts and preparing to board the civilian transports. Then, the human ship arrived. "This is Captain Morrison of the Earth vessel Prometheus," came the transmission. "Nexus vessels, you are attacking civilian refugees. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The pirate response was predictably arrogant. "Human vessel, you are outgunned 20-1. Withdraw or be destroyed." "Negative, Nexus command. This is your final warning." Professor Zarathek pulled up the tactical display showing the engagement. The human ship was indeed vastly outgunned. A mid-sized science vessel, facing 20 heavily armed pirate ships. By any rational analysis, the humans should have withdrawn and waited for military support. Instead, they attacked. But not in any way the galaxy had ever seen before. "Professor," Sarah said quietly, "you've been wondering how humans survived on a death world. This is how. The human ship didn't engage in a traditional space battle. Instead, it did something that violated every known principle of civilized warfare. It rammed the nearest pirate vessel at full speed. The collision destroyed both ships instantly. Survivors from Prometheus are boarding escape pods," came the communication updates. Pirates moving to intercept. But something was wrong with the tactical display. The wreckage from the collision was moving in patterns that didn't match normal debris trajectories. "The explosion wasn't random," Sarah explained, watching her classmates' horrified faces. "Captain Morrison calculated the collision to create a debris field that would disable 3 more pirate ships and scatter the others into suboptimal firing positions. He killed himself to create tactical advantage." Proctor's voice was barely a whisper. "Captain Morrison was following standard human military doctrine," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "When facing superior numbers, use any available means to even the odds." On the display, the human escape pods were indeed being pursued by pirates, but their flight patterns weren't random either. They were leading the pursuing ships through the debris field, where hidden explosive charges were detonating with precise timing. "The escape pods aren't trying to escape," Professor Zarathek realized with dawning horror. "They're hunting. Each pod carries a crew of highly trained humans," Sarah confirmed. "They're using themselves as bait to draw the pirates into prepared kill zones." The tactical display showed the pirate formation beginning to collapse. Ships that pursued the human pods found themselves isolated, their sensors compromised by debris, their formations broken. One by one, they were being picked off by precisely placed explosives and improvised weapons. "But this is impossible," Churek chittered frantically. "They're outnumbered, outgunned, their ship is destroyed. How are they winning?" Sarah turned to face him, and her expression was cold as space itself. "Because humans don't fight fair. We fight to win." The pirate communications, which had been confident and mocking an hour earlier, were now frantic and confused. Their sophisticated battle formations were useless against an enemy that refused to engage in conventional combat. "Human survivors have somehow weaponized their own wreckage," came the incredulous reports. "They're using debris as projectiles, rigging explosions, and..." A pause. "Sir, they appear to be boarding our ships." "Boarding?" Professor Zarathek checked the display. "How is that possible? Their ship was destroyed." "Humans in pressure suits are using the debris field for cover," Sarah explained. "They're approaching pirate ships, cutting through the hulls, and engaging in close-quarters combat." Dr. Yexandri's psychological scanners were recording human brain patterns from the communication feeds, and the readings were unlike anything in her database. "Miss Chun, the neural activity I'm detecting from your people, they're operating at levels that should be physiologically impossible." "Combat psychology," Sarah said simply. "Humans under extreme stress experience heightened awareness, increased strength, reduced pain sensitivity, and accelerated reaction times. Our ancestors needed these abilities to survive fights with megafauna." The pirate communications were becoming increasingly desperate. "They're not fighting like any known species. They're using improvised weapons, they ignore injury, and they keep attacking even when they're outnumbered." "Standard human infantry tactics," Sarah noted. "Use surprise, aggression, and psychological warfare to break enemy morale." Psychological warfare? Kalani's secondary psychic abilities were picking up the terror emanating from the pirate ships. "Humans are very good at making enemies afraid," Sarah replied. "Fear is a weapon." The battle, if it could still be called that, was rapidly turning into a rout. The pirate ships, designed for attacking helpless civilian vessels, were completely unprepared for an enemy that treated their own destruction as a tactical opportunity. "Nexus command ship is requesting immediate withdrawal," came the latest update. "Human forces have disabled or destroyed 14 vessels. Remaining pirates are attempting to flee." "Let them run," came Captain Morrison's voice, somehow still alive despite his ship's destruction. "Make sure the refugees are safe." Professor Zarathek stared at the tactical display. In less than 2 hours, a single destroyed science ship had defeated 20 pirate vessels through tactics that defied everything she understood about civilized warfare. Miss Chun, she said slowly, your people just won an impossible battle by sacrificing their own ship and using the wreckage as a weapon. This level of tactical innovation and personal sacrifice is completely normal for humans, Sarah finished. We've been doing this kind of thing for millennia. It's how we survived when everything on our planet was trying to kill us. Dr. Yexandri was studying her psychological readings with obvious distress. The human brain patterns during combat show neural activity levels that should cause permanent psychological damage. How do your people recover from such intense stress? Usually pretty well, Sarah replied. Humans are remarkably resilient. We process trauma, learn from it, and move on. It's part of our survival psychology. But the level of violence, the willingness to sacrifice yourselves, the innovative use of destruction as a tactical tool, Professor Zarathek struggled to find words. This isn't just surviving. This is art, Sarah said quietly. Humans have turned warfare into an art form. We study it, refine it, teach it to our children. Because on Earth, the species that couldn't fight effectively went extinct. The aftermath of the battle began streaming in through the communication feeds. The human survivors were already organizing search and rescue operations, treating wounded pirates alongside their own injured, and coordinating with the refugee convoy to ensure everyone's safety. They're helping their enemies? Grokter asked in confusion. Standard procedure, Sarah explained. Once the fighting is over, humans provide medical assistance to all survivors. We separate warfare from medical care. But 30 minutes ago, you were trying to kill these same beings. That's right. Humans are very good at compartmentalizing. We can be utterly ruthless in combat and completely compassionate in peacekeeping. Context matters. Professor Zarathek looked around her classroom at the 7 remaining students. All of them looked shaken, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. Class, she said finally, I think we now understand why Earth is classified as a Class XI death world. It's not just the environment that's deadly. It's everything the environment produced. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Professor, there's something I should probably tell you. Earth isn't actually the most dangerous planet humans have colonized. The silence that followed was absolute. Miss Chun, Professor Zarathek said very carefully, what do you mean? Well, since joining the Federation, human colonists have settled on 17 worlds that were previously classified as uninhabitable. Places with surface temperatures that would melt most metals, atmospheric pressure that would crush normal beings, gravity that would tear apart conventional structures. She activated her personal communication device and showed images of human settlements. New Australia has gravity 3 times Earth normal and surface temperatures that reach 200 degrees Celsius. New Siberia is a frozen world where the average temperature is minus 150 degrees. New Amazon has an atmosphere so toxic that most species would die from a single breath. And humans live on these worlds? Churek's voice was barely audible. Thrive on them, Sarah corrected. We terraform them, adapt to them, turn them into productive colonies. Humans see hostile environments as challenges to overcome, not obstacles to avoid. Professor Zarathek felt a profound shift in her understanding of the galaxy. Miss Chun, how many humans are there? About 15 billion across 47 worlds, Sarah replied. Why? Because, the professor said slowly, if humans can colonize worlds that would kill any other known species, and if they can turn a single destroyed science ship into a victorious fleet, then humanity isn't just another galactic species. She looked at the images of human colonies on impossible worlds, thought about the tactical brilliance she had just witnessed, considered the psychological intensity that Dr. Yexandri had documented. Miss Chun, she continued, I don't think the galaxy has fully understood what it means to have humans as members of the Federation. Sarah smiled, that warm, cheerful expression that no longer seemed innocent to any of them. Professor, I don't think humans have fully understood that either. We're still getting used to the idea that most species can't survive the things we consider normal. As the final reports came in from the Centauri system, all refugees safe, pirates either captured or fled, minimal human casualties despite the apparent suicide mission, Professor Zarathek realized that her xenobiology class had become something far more significant. They had witnessed the galaxy's first real look at what humans were capable of when circumstances demanded it. And as she looked at Sarah, still sitting calmly in her third-row seat, still taking notes about the psychological readings, still every inch the curious student she had appeared to be. Professor Zurathek understood with perfect clarity why Earth was classified as a death world. It wasn't because Earth was dangerous. It was because Earth had produced humans. And humans, as the galaxy was about to discover, were the most beautiful and terrifying force the universe had ever seen. The class was dismissed, but none of them would ever forget the day they learned why humans called their planet home.